Hailing back from the days of Medarot Dual, this emissary of the night and expy of the symbolic legendary figure of Artemis graces the field with arrows that strike true and powerful. It is ATM00 Fegaro Force, with a kit of Hyper Break, Power Sword, Static, Float Legs, and the leg ability of Illusion, which will grant the stealth effect to self when charging Metaforce. Now, much like it is with her twin Iliaco Force and the expy of Apollo, Fegaro Force also brings a number of previously collab-only skills to the table, not just in a conventional way that makes them easier to collect, but especially more so in non-heavy options for females in particular, adding a whole lot more variety and flexibility to what she brings to the table, as both she and Iliaco Force bring the powers of Sun and Moon to the battlefield that they fight upon. Hyper Break on the head part is a shooting-based gravity skill, so while it isn't necessarily charge reliant, it does get a success bonus tied to its Metaforce gauge upon firing and being used. But break attacks and gravity attribute in particular is also especially known more so for something else, and that is its ability to heavy punish. So that means if you're attacking anybody that has, say, 2 or more heavy parts, you are most certainly going to be bringing the pain with this sucker as well. However, if they're only using 1 or none, probably not nearly as much power across the board. But as far as power is concerned, Hyper Break most certainly doesn't have to worry about that either. With a base power of over the mid-1400s, it's already going to hit pretty hard. But it's also worth noting that Hyper Break also hits even harder with a much higher success modifier because of the hyper effect that it brings to the table. Of course, at the cost, that does mean you can't dodge or defend on cooldown after using a much stronger skill, but if timed correctly in the right situation, this will absolutely, as the name implies, break anything that it brings to the table. And the heavier the opponent, the more chaos Fegaro Force brings when bringing them to their knees. Power Sword on the right arm is a conventional melee skill that gets a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as her legs remain intact. And with the base power of about mid-1200s, it's already going to be hitting pretty solidly hard on its own with no real drawback or cooldown. And speaking of cooldown, thanks to a pretty fairly recent patch that buffed a lot of the power-based attacks, Power Sword, Power Hammer, Power Missile, and Napalm, and so on, it does mean these attacks are a whole lot easier to use with much more consistent performance and not necessarily have to worry about getting punished on the back end, if at all, because either you missed or didn't break them in time with that attack and eat a cooldown punish. This means that they're going to be a little more consistent and a little easier to use overall without really having to worry about the back end punishment on your cooldown. Left arm of Static, on the other hand, is a conventional shooting-based skill that has a very unique modifier and behavior to it. Simply put, upon attacking the target, Static will instantly cut its HP down to 50% of whatever the total remaining of that part's armor is when attacking. This basically means that if it's at full armor, well, guess what? Now it's at 50 and no ifs, ands, or buts the enemy can do about it. And if you attack him again, that's 50% of that total and down and so on and so forth. But Static is also incapable of breaking anything on its own. So this is something that you're going to be using as a first turn, first strike kind of basis to basically start cutting the enemy down quickly and pretty considerably. You can come behind with either with Hyper Break or Power Sword and really finish the job pretty quickly and very consistently. And it's also worth noting that because it does check for the highest total remaining HP, it is also worth noting that this can just as easily cut any meta change models down to size. Since they only have 1 HP bar, well, guess what? 50% of that is suddenly gone as well, just like it would be of any other part it's targeting. Float Legs means that Fegaro Force will have pretty solid coverage across all terrains at A rank across the board and, of course, S rank on Cyber. Of course, at the cost that she cannot support any heavy parts whatsoever, which actually serves as a little bit of an advantage to her, primarily because Hyper Break and Power Sword are skills that were previously available only on collaboration models. Power Sword in particular with Imperial Drago from the recently finished Digimon second run collaboration, and Hyper Break from Hoshino Nadeshiko from the Nadeshiko collaboration. But still very solid coverage across the board for what she brings to the table. As far as her leg stats are concerned, though, she actually fares just a little bit better than her twin as far as the base numbers are concerned. With the base mobility of 819, she is going to be notably faster than her twin right as the fight says go. And with an evade of 1205, she's also going to have a little easier of a time dodging or grazing as necessary, especially with a lot of low success or very blind attacks. However, her resistance stats do take just a little bit of a nosedive, though, in trade of that. So instead, she has a melee resist of just shy of 1200 and a shooting resist at 1107. So still very well rounded and pretty much at a point where you want to be with your damage reduction, but not necessarily as tanky when it comes to the base numbers are concerned. As far as armor, she's packing about 3659 for the head, about 3359 for the arms, and just shy of 3900 there for the legs. So moderately healthy as well for a model that and what she brings to the table, and pretty much right where you want to be with armor as well. When it comes to base power, she's pretty solid in that respect as well. Plus, with the ability of Illusion applying Stealth to Self when charging Metaforce, this allows her to basically bypass any kind of shielders or interceptors that want to try to tank the blow that she's planning to deal and attack exactly who she wants to strike in the dark of the night. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Fegaro Force a pretty well-rounded 7.5 out of 10. She's a very synergetic and incredibly conventional model that you really don't need to use any CG sustain for to use right out of the box. Now granted, Hyper Break as a gravity skill does have a CG bonus tied to it. You don't necessarily need to capitalize on it, especially if you want power. Mostly because you'd be using Hyper Break for any of your double or triple heavy enemies, and focus more consistently between static and power sword for your conventional damage across the board. But again, still a very synergetic model that you can use pretty much fresh from the box, and given that she also does not have any heavy slots, means that she's very easy to use well. That being said, for mixed parts score, I also have to grade her at a 7.5 out of 10 for these very same reasons. While she is an incredibly synergetic and conventional skill set by herself, mixing up the parts is where you're going to be getting a lot of skin in the game as well. Especially with a non-heavy power sword that you can stick basically anywhere, another access to static in particular, thanks to its buff now no longer having cooldown or defend penalties. This is a skill you can use very conventionally and very easily anywhere. And Hyper Break, I really don't have to say anything further on why it's incredibly useful, because if you're going to be breaking anyone that is double or triple heavy, Fegaro Force is probably going to be leading that charge very specifically and nearly exclusively, and guaranteeing that if they're bringing the weight, she's going to bring the pain.